you're in the right place. This is the Eatfluencer Podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Maggie Landes. Together, we are going to unpack everything about eating and discover the what, when, and how that will let you lead your best life. This is not your doctor's conversation about nutrition. Today is when you can start to love eating again. Let food be food and you be you. Get ready to get eatfluenced. Welcome back to the Eatfluencer Podcast. I'm your host, Maggie Landes, and I'm glad that you're here today. If you're a new listener, I'm a physician, medical doctor turned nutritionist turned health coach, and my job now is to coach and educate women that are burnt out on the chronic diet culture, be able to fix their relationship with food, learn the practice of intuitive eating, and do the mindset work so that they can live more contently in their lives and in their relationship with their body and with eating. Now, today you're listening to episode 17, which is called Becoming a Professional in a Diet Culture World. And I have a special guest episode for you today with Alison Barkman, who is a registered dietitian in the New York area. And I thought this conversation was important to share with everyone, even if you're not a dietitian or doctor or health professional of any capacity. It's really important that people understand how the professional field of nutrition and dietetics is not immune to the influence of diet culture. That's how invasive our diet culture is that nothing is in isolation. And there's really two major reasons that this flavor of diet culture is persisting in the field of nutrition and dietetics. And one is because many people choose to enter this profession because of their own personal history of dieting, disordered eating, weight loss, eating disorders, sort of a focus on food that they've had through their life, and that draws them to become professionals in the area. The second major problem that Alice and I talk about is the formal education that we receive both in medical school, in graduate school, in nutrition, in her dietetics internship, all the things that these professionals are required to do. The formal education program is still very much buried in a weight-centric, very outdated concept of health. And it's strange when you think about it that we as a society sort of allow science to evolve, and we accept that as we get new information and new research and we have new technology and there's new innovative ideas that our thinking and our behavior in scientific disciplines is allowed to change. I mean, we do that all the time. We don't the medicine that we're using now in the hospital is different than it was 50 years ago. The engineers at NASA are building stuff different than they did 50 years ago. But for some reason, nutrition and dietetics is sort of stuck in this, I don't know what to call it other than just like a time warp. And we sort of feel inside that bubble that we're not permitted to change, and that once we learn something a certain way, that is permanently truth. And there's a lot of reasons. There's so much involved when you're talking about a social construct. There's of course, social justice issues and political issues and health policy and the food industry and all these economic influencers, and it's a lot. But what Alison and I talk about today in our conversation is her story, which I feel was important to bring, not so much, for Alison's personal history, but that her story is more representative than not as to how many people come into the field of professional dietetics and nutrition. And we talk in our conversation here about how powerful that is when health professionals and dietitians can heal their own relationship with eating and detach their professional efforts from this diet culture thinking that we learned in our formal education, and be able to help more people do the same. People like Alison are the people that are going to flip the script on these issues and are going to help the intuitive eating, health at every size movements become vernacular. And she's a fantastic person to talk with. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation that we had. It's a little longer than most of my podcast episodes are, but stick through it for the end, because the Alison has so much to share and we have so much to learn from her conversation here. So before we start, let me give you a quick little bio on her. Alison Barkman has a master's degree and is a registered dietitian in a New York based practice with over 10 years of experience working in a variety of settings, including clinical nutrition, private counseling, and has worked in the academic setting as an adjunct professor of nutrition. After she worked in private practice for a while with most of her clients seeking weight loss, she began to feel like there was more to nutrition and health than constant dieting and this obsession with obtaining the, quote, perfect body. So this prompted her to dive deeper and do a little more research, complete her coursework, and she is also a certified intuitive eating counselor now and works with clients virtually in her one-on-one private practice that is based in intuitive eating. And she helps women break free from food rules, heal from their disordered eating, and stop being at war with their body so that they can live healthier lives. She also is the host of a podcast called Speaking of Hungry, which I would absolutely recommend you put on your playlist. And she manages a free intuitive eating support group on Facebook called the Intuitive Eating and Body Compassion Community. So I'll have all those things in the show notes for you so you can find Alison after our conversation. And without any further ado, here's my conversation with Alison Barkman. Okay, well, here we have Alison Barkman. Welcome, Alison. I'm glad you're here today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, and I want just maybe my listeners to hear a little bit about your story and how you got to the business you're doing now and the things you do now. And I think the real interesting points are how you got into the field of nutrition and dietetics, because you're a registered dietitian, and then also maybe how you got into this non-diet space, because that's different than maybe a conventional career path.
Yeah, sure. So I basically, in high school, I started with a diet, and that diet snowballed into an eating disorder where I was restricting my food pretty heavily during the week. And then I would go on these binges on the weekend. I abused laxatives. I wasn't really exercising a ton then. And I lost a lot of weight, and my period disappeared, and this was pretty much like the last 2 years of high school. And
Which was in the 90s, I have to say, just
which was
not
in
to
the
throw your age out
90s.
there,
Oh, I
but
don't care.
this is like when dieting was like just the thing
Yeah,
that everybody did.
absolutely. And I will say, and I mean, I have such a great relationship with my mom, and I hate if she ever hears any of my podcasts. If I talk about her, I am not blaming her at all. But I also, and I think a lot of us in the 80s and 90s grew up with moms who this was like what they were doing every day. And, my mother was weighing herself every single day, and it was just obvious. She wasn't trying to hide anything that she was doing.
Sure.
I think everyone just thought that that was being healthy
Right.
then. Like that was the key to health, was dieting and keeping your weight down, and making sure you look nice.
And whatever it
So
took to do it. Yeah.
whatever, exactly. So yeah, so that was kind of where things started. And it was toward the end of high school. So obviously I was looking into colleges and thinking about what I wanted to major in. And nutrition definitely came up, and I liked the idea of nutrition. And I applied to all the colleges that I applied to had nutrition programs. Um, and then I kind of, once I was in college, decided that, no, I don't want to do that. I think I'd rather do something else. And long story short, I ended up with a communications degree, and I worked in public relations for a while, doing like a mix of PR and advertising
Mhm.
for pharmaceutical companies. But the idea of the my obsession with health and weight and nutrition kind of really didn't go away, especially after college. I gained weight in college, like most people do. And when I got out of college, I was like, I've got to try and lose this weight. So I went back to the diet that I did years ago, which was Weight Watchers.
Right.
And it really, I don't remember it becoming out of control then.
Well, it was still
Um,
probably pretty normative for it's
well,
just a
it was a,
cultural thing and your people our age and our friends were that's what you did. You got out of
yeah,
college and got it together because you're like a real
right.
adult now. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't, I'm like, I got to do something with myself. I'm working in Manhattan. I'm young, I'm single, and I got to lose this weight. So the other thing that I was going to say is this is at the time when like Atkins and South Beach diet were really big. And so I think Weight Watchers was seen more as like the normal, healthy way to go, because it
Mhm.
wasn't like I was cutting out carbohydrates or anything like that. So, but anyway, so as I was working, one of my accounts, even though it was mostly pharmaceutical companies, but I did get on a consumer health account for Slim Fast.
Oh, interesting.
And I actually had to interview some dietitians. One of them, I don't know if you might not know of her, but Nancy Clark, she's a huge sports dietitian.
Oh,
And
okay.
I interviewed her to do, just doing all this work we were doing. And it started to spark my interest in nutrition again. And plus, my sister was going back to school for nutrition. So it was just everything all at once. And I decided to go back to school. And I had to do like a bachelor master's program in nutrition. And I remember one of the first things I remember was a course. It was probably like, I don't know if I forgot. It was like the life nutrition in the life cycle, I think it was.
Mhm.
Um, but we had to, the professor said, why don't, I want you to practice tracking everything you eat,
And you're like, I
logging.
got this. I got this, mister. I've been doing this since.
Well, you know what, funny enough. So now this has been a few years since I had done Weight Watchers again. So I actually hadn't, it had been a few years since I had been tracking anything. And I was kind of, it's weird. I've always fluctuated between dieting, getting really disordered, and then almost like just listening to my body and being so happy that I wasn't tracking anything anymore.
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of where I was at that point. I was just like, oh God, I'm like, I don't want to do this assignment. This is awful. Like I been there, done that, don't want to do that anymore. And I started doing it. And you learn about like how many calories your body needs and basal metabolic rate and all of these different things we're learning about as nutrition undergrads and graduate students. And so I was tracking and I started like looking at how much I was eating, and I was thinking, wow, I really eat a lot. Like I just remember thinking like I eat too much. This is
Right.
not, I'm
But you
learning
were
like
feeling okay with it until you saw it on paper. Like it was
until I
almost
saw it on
comfortable to
paper.
you, and then you see it on paper,
Mhm.
and the algebra of it like upsets you. I mean,
Yes. Yeah,
I
because I
think that's an
saw the
important point.
numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
like I mean, like everybody's one thing you learn is like um a piece of salmon or a piece of steak. It should be like a deck of cards, like those types
The
of
size
things.
of your palm. Yes.
Right. Which is like what, maybe 3 to 4 ounces. And I'm like, well, I could eat like 8 to 10 ounces of salmon. I don't know. Like, I mean, I was just guessing, but I knew I
Right.
could eat twice the amount. And in nutrition school, and I actually have them in my house too, all those food models, those rubbery foods. And
Yes,
it's like,
yes,
here,
yes.
this is a serving of salmon. And I'm like, it flipped a switch in me. Something that
Uh-huh.
had been quiet and dormant and not around for a while. It flipped a switch and it got the everything was rolling around in my head. And I'm like, it's too much. And then I also, while I was
Meaning that you
nutrition,
wanted to, when you say too much, you mean meaning you wanted to go back to the restrictive behavior because, or you.
not right away, not right away. It just got me thinking and second guessing, like all these classes I was taking and learning about um, calories and what excess weight can do to you and all of medical nutrition therapy. I mean, the coursework is so medical nutrition therapy intense that basically, I feel like what it all came around to was diabetes, heart disease, all these different diseases. The answer is losing weight, like if metabolic syndrome. If
Mm-hmm.
you have metabolic syndrome, this is going to, increase your chances to end up becoming diabetic or have cardiovascular disease. And what's the answer to that? Because metabolic syndrome, I don't remember exactly. I don't know if you like all the waist circumference, and
Right.
so it
It
just
well, it's all numbers. It's basically like comes down to like you need to lose weight and you need to fit into these numbers. And all those things you
exactly.
mentioned, it becomes a math exercise,
Yep.
you know.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I was as a student, at one point I got a job in a personal training gym doing nutrition counseling, and this was just before I started my dietetic internship. Um, and I was obviously, everybody I saw was for weight loss because they were at this personal training gym working out, and then they met with me. And
Well, that's
the
the
one
other
of
half of the math problem, right? I mean, you have the calories in and the calories out, so now you got both sides of the equation.
Right, exactly. And then one of my bosses at that place said to me, "Oh, well, you should try being, I don't, these aren't the words he used exactly, but almost like being a guinea pig. Like I should go through the program, like do the workouts, do his wife was a dietitian also, and she put together this like nutrition plan. And he's like, you should give it a try." Now, again, before he said that to me, I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I was just like, I work out, I eat healthy, like I'm fine. But that was another switch that went off, and that basically sent me back into a complete disordered eating disorder, um, because I started tracking every single morsel of food I was putting. And this is before they had apps, like all those
Oh, you had to
apps
like
where you
write
can
it
just,
down and
I had
stuff,
to like
right?
write it. I'm like looking, or I don't have the book
Old
anymore because I
school,
got rid
yeah,
of it.
pen and
With
paper.
that little calorie counter book, I think he was called Calorie King. There was like a man with like
Uh-huh.
a king crown. I don't know. And I used to look at that when you think of the time that I spent weighing and measuring every morsel of food that I put in my body and tracking it for I
That's
don't even know
exhausting
how
to
long.
even think about, honestly. It's just
Yeah,
it's a lot.
it is a lot. And so I ended up losing a lot of weight once again. My period disappeared. And now here I am. I'm about to start my dietetic internship. Fast forward, got through all of that, and started working as a dietitian. And I did a lot of clinical work, I had different jobs, but then I did also start seeing people on the side for private counseling. And
Mhm.
most of the people that came to me were for weight loss. And it got to a point where, and I was, as we were speaking before we started recording, it was after I had my second son, because while I was pregnant with him, I was just so fixated on, when this pregnancy is over, I'm going to get my body back. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I want to be thin and fit and whatever. And I went in full speed ahead, like right after I had him, and I lost a lot of weight yet again, lost my period again. And now I'm sitting here counseling people on weight loss. And it took a while. I don't remember how long, it could have been a good year or two until I just got so uncomfortable with all of it. I realized there was something wrong with me. I was fatigued. I was waking up every morning feeling like bricks fell on my head. I was depressed. I was losing I was screaming at my kids all the time, even when they weren't, I was snapping. I was very, very irritable. It
We
was
were
just
like starving. I mean, you're
all the
like
classic
starving.
sign.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
All the classic signs of not, eating enough and what happens to you. And so just all at once, I was like, how can I work with people on weight loss? I had read the book Intuitive Eating a long time ago. It came out in
Yeah, 96
1995.
or yeah, 95, 96.
Yeah,
Yeah.
95, 96. One of my professors introduced it in one of our classes, which
That's actually
was
kind of very progressive. Yeah.
absolutely. And I remember reading it and thinking like, oh, that sounds like such a nice idea, but that's not for me. Like
Right.
that, maybe I'll get there. And this is how I think a lot of people think of it. Like, let me just do one more diet,
When I get skinny, then I can eat like that.
then I'll be an intuitive eater. And that's what I was thinking. So,
Right.
and my sister always kind of, who is now also a dietitian, she always liked the idea of it. And my mother and my sister were the ones who knew through all my ups and downs with disordered eating. They knew when I was in it, and they're like, they would call me out on it. Like, you're too thin. This is not normal for you. My period would be missing, and they're like, and I would justify it by saying, well, there must just be something must be going on, like with my hormones, or, I just figured I was healthy. It was
Right.
nothing I was doing. I was in denial. I
Yeah.
think I
Well,
was also trying to defend it.
right. And I that really, marks the emphasis that when you're undernourished, your brain is not even working
No,
correctly. That people
no,
don't appreciate that aspect of it, that your brain, like literally the way that you think, that your decision making, your logic is not normal when you have such a malnourished state.
yeah.
So it's not, I mean, it's, yes, it's a mental problem, but it's also a physical problem. And I think
Hmm.
that's underappreciated. So I just, not to take that
Yeah.
over, but it's just, that sounds like you didn't see it. And that's part of it, because, I'm glad you did have your mom and your sister to sort of call you out on it. Cause who knows, how long you could have just been stuck there.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I think it's classic with people, whether you have a full-blown eating disorder or disordered eating, like even when people are, so fixated on losing weight and they don't want to go out with their friends, attend a social event. And they're just it's like all of a sudden your life is becoming this goal to just get to a certain size, and you'll
Right.
do
Well,
anything to get
you
there.
you said you're pregnant with your child and you're already thinking about how you haven't even given birth yet, and you're already
No.
thinking about how you're going to lose weight and fantasizing about the jeans you're going to wear and
Yep.
whatever. And that's not normal.
No.
Although we think it is, because so many of us do that. We just
Mhm.
have this kind of fantastical thinking, I guess is a better word, of like what our life would be like if we could shrink our bodies,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
you're seeing the patients in your private practice feeling like a little bit uncomfortable because you have such pathology yourself and you're
Hmm.
counseling them. And then what comes next after that part of the story?
Yeah. So here I am telling people in a nicely packaged dietitian type way to eat
Right.
less. And it just struck me. I'm like, how is this? I'm like, I could be causing these people to develop eating disorders. This just seems disordered because it's what I do and it's disordered. And so I decided to stop. I couldn't do it anymore. I just, when you don't have enthusiasm for
Sure.
something. And I also knew that I really needed to help myself. Like, I couldn't go on the way I was. It had to stop. So I stopped. I stopped seeing clients, and I I'm trying to think of the process of events. I know I was going to a therapist uh, almost immediate. Like, I think my second son, when he was like 3 months old, but that was like more for postpartum depression. And um, I worked with her for years, and then I kind of knew that I needed to find. She was great, but I needed to find someone else, and I needed to find someone who understood eating disorders. And so I did a lot of work on myself between therapy. And I also decided to take the certification to become an intuitive eating counselor, which
Right.
is, for anyone listening who doesn't know, if you're a doctor, a nurse, a dietitian, a therapist, different people in the healthcare
Health
field
profession. Yeah. Mhm.
can do this. Yeah. And it was with Evelyn Tribole, one of the authors of the intuitive eating book. And it's there's a whole bunch of different pieces to what you have to do to get to the certification part. But I did that, and it was great. It was helpful. It helped me answer a lot of the questions, because I felt like with intuitive eating, it was going against so much of everything I learned as a
Oh,
nutrition student. So I was
absolutely.
kind of like, well, what? And like, how can you, like, I even remember my sister, who liked the idea of intuitive eating, but she said to me, she's like, but what if you have someone who's just been like overweight their whole life and eating poorly, and they finally like just get it together and they're eating better and they lose weight? Like, is that necessarily bad? And I said, no, it's not bad. I said, but I think it really, if we're talking about like making some habit changes, um,
It's all
that
the
don't become
motivation. Yeah, it's the
exactly
story behind the behavior
right.
is what makes it good or bad, I think, right?
Exactly. Or what could make it detrimental, what could really affect your mental health. And that's part of it too. Yeah. So I had a lot of questions, and a lot of them were answered by going through that certification. And it wasn't immediate, but it was maybe, I don't know, 8 months or so later that I decided to get back into private practice,
Mhm.
but exclusively see people just for intuitive eating and non-diet approaches to nutrition.
Right. Yeah, because it's I mean, yeah, I don't have to tell you this, but some of the listeners may not like realize that people like you and I, that's not even now still in the year 2021 is not the norm. That's not the conventional teaching in the academic, track. That's not
Hmm.
the sort of that's not what's printed in our journals that we get. That's not we're pretty countercultural to our own profession.
Yeah.
Um but I think I don't know. I'm having, and I'm interested in your opinion about this, whether that's an advantage or a disadvantage that so many professionals, yourself being an example of that, go into the field of nutrition, dietetics, that kind of stuff because of their own history of disordered eating, eating disorders, body image issues, dieting history, all that stuff. Because it's very, I can tell you that the percentage is very high. I mean, that's even
Mhm.
in, shown in the literature that people entering, master's programs in nutrition and taking the RD exam and stuff have a more than average, uh, distribution of eating disorders compared to the population at large.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's good or bad for everybody else that's coming to us as professionals. What's your thoughts on that?
Uh, I mean, that's a great question, actually. I don't think I think it could be either way. And I don't know if it's just, I do think that intuitive eating and this concept of anti-diet is gaining in popularity from when that book was first published in 95, 96, for sure.
Right.
Because we see so many other, like Christy Harrison, from the Food Psych
Right.
podcast with the book Anti-Diet, um, is one example. And
Right.
there's so many podcasts out there, and it may be because I'm
Right.
so immersed in all of this, and like
Well,
I'm
I
just
think, and tell me if I'm not
surrounding.
mistaken, but what's the name of the big, like the dietetics big meeting that everybody talks
Oh,
about?
the
You know what I'm talking about? It's got a little
the
acronym.
food and fancy. The
Fancy.
meet You're talking about the meeting,
Yes,
yeah,
fancy.
for the Academy of
That
Nutrition and
yes.
Dietetics, yeah.
And Evelyn Tripoli, I think, was a speaker, but that was only like in the last 2 or 3 years. That was not,
Yeah.
I mean, they
Yeah,
published that book
so
20 years ago, almost.
exactly,
So
exactly. So to answer your question, I think that um for someone like in my case, in the beginning, it probably wasn't the best because I was so disordered. I didn't really get my disordered eating only kind of got worse when I was in school for nutrition. And I'm not saying this is what's happening to everyone. There might be people who had an eating disorder, got into the nutrition, doing the undergrad, graduate, and had an opposite. Maybe it helped them. And I
right.
feel like I actually, on my podcast, I feel like I might have talked to someone who said that that's what happened to her. I don't really now. I can't remember who the heck I was talking to, but they said that it actually helped them learn that what they were doing was not good for their body.
Right.
Um, but that's not always the case. So
No,
I think
especially in a
that,
super weight centric training. I mean, that's just how it is. It's
yeah,
still now,
yeah,
I'm in my
and it can
master's
be
program now, and it's just like I was telling you before we started recording. I mean, there's this book that was published, in the last couple of years has got like the food pyramid in it. I mean, and
right.
all the calculations, all the weight loss formulas and stuff. That's
Hmm.
still the mainstream teaching to nutrition
Yeah,
professionals.
still using BMI.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think that it can be problematic if the person has an eating disorder, disordered eating, gets into the field, And that is the foundation of what they're teaching to others. Absolutely, without a doubt. It's dangerous.
Right.
Um, but I think there's so many of us that that all of a sudden we learn about intuitive eating as dietitians and we're like, oh my God, what is this? Like, wait a minute. And we grab onto it and we learn everything we possibly can. And now we're going out and helping other people realize that they don't need to do what they always thought they needed to do, which is, chasing after unrealistic goals and basically being at war with your body for your life forever.
Right.
So I, I I feel like I don't have like a, a
We
definite
have a
answer to the
good, I mean,
question.
I hear what you're saying that, maybe at the beginning when you're still learning about it and you're disordered so much yourself, it's not the right time to be teaching it. But
Mhm,
it is a great opportunity because you have both the sort of lived experience of that life and also the, of course, the training, the
mhm,
science and everything, which leads me to another question. I'm just curious about this. And I just thought of this. This is not one I mentioned to you earlier, but um, I love science. People like me, a lot of my listeners love evidence. We're like, that's what is sometimes the thing that convinces us is when
mhm.
we really can listen to a study, a person that really knows what piece, or if there was any piece of the science that kind of made you believe, like, okay, this is for real. This is not just like a book somebody wrote or some idea they came up with. Like, was it because I'll tell you, for me, it was the fact that one of the major predictors of future weight gain is active dieting.
Mhm,
That pursuit of weight loss is a predictor of weight gain. And
mhm.
that, I mean, that's in the science. And that was like, that really stood out to me, like, oh, we are off the mark, so far off the mark, and I just wonder, this is just my scientific curiosity, if there
Mhm.
was like a piece of information that you were like, was sort of like a mind blowing,
Yeah, and
thing.
unfortunately I don't have the study right in front of me to say which one it was. I did my thesis on intuitive eating, my master's thesis. This was a long time ago. And um, I remember one of the studies was where they were, and this isn't necessarily just about dieting, but it's more about food restriction
Uh-huh.
and food rules. And it was involving chocolate and where some of the participants were able to, they were told that they couldn't have it, but it was in front of them. And then when I'm not telling it exactly right, but it was
Right.
basic. What it came down to was like, if you're told that you can't have something, so like forbidden foods,
Right.
it's going to drive you more to want that food and almost make it like a food addiction, which, as far as I know, we don't really have evidence out there that there is such a thing as being
Right.
addicted to food the way we could be addicted
Right.
to heroin.
Right. But the
So
behaviors, yeah, the
it's,
traits of, yeah, that.
yes. And that was, for me, that was one of the first things that clicked into my head where I was like, where this whole restriction and forbidden food driving you to eat even more of it and leading to weight gain. That, I don't know, it was just the first time I
Yeah.
really kind of let something like that sink in. And I was like, hmm,
Right.
so interesting. Like, because I lived most of my life, even whether I was actively in an eating disorder, actively dieting or not, I always had all these rules
Uh-huh.
and forbidden foods and things that you shouldn't be eating. And it just kind of, that kind of clicked for me. And then also another study that so many people talk about is that I want to make sure I say it right, the Minnesota starvation.
Oh, yeah, Ansel
I mean,
Keys, right? Yeah.
that's, I mean, that's, that study was so long ago, but that if you read that study, it's like, oh my God, that's what
Right.
happens to us. Maybe
Right.
on a lesser scale, maybe not to such an extreme, but that's what's going
Right.
on.
Well, and that's valuable. That study is very telling, and of course, and I'll put it in the show notes for people that are interested, in big nerds like me want to actually look that up. But I mean, it's sort of out of the bounds of what would be considered sort of ethical research now. I don't think we'll ever reproduce a study of that magnitude just because of the way it was done,
Mhm.
But yeah, but it basically shows that you restrict people into a starvation state, there are biological responses that you cannot overcome. Like
Mhm.
it is going to happen to anybody, any human. So we sure spend a lot of time, effort, money, energy, blood, sweat, and tears trying to undo our biology.
Mhm.
That's what it really
Yep,
comes down to, I think. Um,
absolutely.
but I think we're going to probably wrap up pretty soon here. But I wanted to just, this has been such a great conversation because it is fascinating to me how people came to this little corner of the world and are able to really dig into the science and
Mhm.
get out there and help people learn about these things that most of they're not. This is not the headline. This is not on the end cap at the grocery store. This is not in the textbook in your undergraduate nutrition education even
Mhm.
now. But if you had any last little advice to specifically if you were talking to people entering the field of nutrition, dietetics, that sort of thing, what you know how would you say the or what's the importance of them understanding their own maybe values about eating, disordered eating, weight bias, that kind of stuff that is just basically built into us if you've lived in this culture? How can they start to not carry that baggage so far into their profession that they have to, you know, feel like uncomfortable like you did for several years before you undo it all? Like what, is it they need to work themselves with an intuitive eating dietitian or counselor? They
So,
need
so you mean like if somebody does have like a disorder going into the
well,
field, going or
not even so much that they necessarily have an eating disorder, but they're in this profession that is so it just has built in weight stigma and weight
Mhm.
centric thinking and the
Yeah.
teaching. I mean, and my listeners know that's how I basically came to even go back to school
Mhm.
because I wanted to prove that it wasn't being done like that. And I essentially proved that it was, but to
Mhm.
myself, just prove to
Yep.
myself like this is crazy still. But
Yep.
um, how can they be successful in their, I mean, obviously you have to take the exam, you got to take the RD exam, you have to pass your courses, you have to do the
Right.
things, you have to sort of participate. I guess what I'm saying is you have to
Yes.
sort of participate in order to be able to be credible, but not to let that stuff just sit in you.
Yeah. I would say, keep an open mind. And while you're, I think that it's important to remember that disordered eating, not eating disorders, but disordered eating is so normalized right now. So many things that we do that we consider normal, like we think it's normal for someone to go do a detox for a couple days. Um,
Right.
that that maybe it's not normal and maybe it's not what we should be doing. And so to keep an open mind, to explore all the different avenues of nutrition. I always used to like when I was an adjunct, I always used to like to tell my I almost said my clients, my students,
Yeah.
that you don't have to just graduate and go into a clinical role. There are so many things you can do as a dietitian for a career,
Right.
and that's another part of the
Right.
nutrition is like there's so much like
That's a different
get that
podcast.
clinical job first, be work in the hospital first and do that for like 5 years and then do something else. I disagree with that, quite frankly.
Right.
I think if you want to do that, wonderful, but you don't have to. I think there's so many different things you can do, and I think you really just have to keep an open mind. And kind of like you said in the beginning, a lot of this is I feel like none of it should be set in stone. Like it's a lot of it is kind of old, and we need to think out of the box with things like BMI, for instance. Is
Right.
that really, I mean, think of how nutrition has evolved. Things we were saying 10, 20 years ago, we would never be telling people now. So I think that anyone going
Right.
into the field of nutrition just has to keep an open mind, think about their beliefs and values, and and sort of if they feel that that focusing on weight and weight loss so much is not the answer, and that people can find health at every size many
Right.
different ways, then they need to explore that and research it more, just like you did when you started
Yeah.
diving into all the literature.
Yeah, I mean, you're a scientist. Like, if you're gonna be the sort of investigator, then you start figuring stuff out and realizing that you don't.
Mhm.
Yes, I'm okay. You need to read the textbook and pass your dietetics exam or
Yes.
whatever, get your master's degree. But at the same time, like, it's very inspiring to meet people like you, Allison, who are just really have been comfortable, because it takes a little bit of guts to step out of the mainstream. That's the only way I think this is going to heal, that people are going to heal and get this message, is by people, being willing to do the work to find out the truth and then share that with people. And I'm so glad that you have found a place in your career where that's your deal. So I think we're going to wrap up the conversation here, but real quick, if you will
Yeah.
just mention to my listeners, how they could get in touch with you, where they find you on social media, what sort of, if they want to hear more about what you do, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I have my podcast, Speaking of Hungry. That's one place. I also have a Facebook, it's a support group. It's called the Intuitive Eating and Body Compassion Community. And I'm pretty much trying to duck into there every day and answer people's questions, and I post in there.
Mhm.
And it's a support group for people who just are trying to explore this whole world of anti-diet and intuitive eating, and want support from others. And then on Instagram, my handle is at Alison Barkman RD, and my website is AlisonBarkman.com.
I
So
love when
those
it's
are
all the
all the
same.
different
Yes.
ways.
We can find you everywhere, and I'll put
It's
all
pretty
those in
easy.
the show notes so people can find you. But I appreciate
Great.
you being here, and the time you've taken today, Allison, to
Yeah.
share with everybody what you're doing. And I just love this conversation. We'll have to do it again.
Thank you.
That was so great, wasn't it? I had so much fun talking to Allison and could have talked for many more hours with her about these issues. So I want you to know that taking down diet culture is something that's going to happen from the bottom up, that one person at a time is going to have to learn the truth about human nutrition, about health, and be willing to change the way they think. So I hope in this conversation, you got really two things out of this: that this is a complex task, and that nutrition professionals like Allison and myself are, number one, humans and have our own personal history with eating and food relationships, and that may or may not be influencing our practice now. Number two, we are trained in a weight centric diet culture education system. That's just how it is, even, in the year 2021. So I say that not to invoke fear in you, but just to give you an awareness that because somebody has an RD or an MD or an MPH behind their name, does not mean that that's a protected space to help you recover from diet culture. It really ends up being your responsibility to find people who truly understand the principles of intuitive eating, health at every size, and are invested in meeting you where you are and helping you create a life outside of diet culture. Alison Barkman is absolutely one of those hidden gems, and I would encourage you to listen to her podcast, Speaking of Hungry, follow her on social media, and even consider being one of her clients. She's wonderful, personable, and extremely smart, and very well versed in helping women recover from chronic dieting. So all her contact information is in my show notes if you're looking for her. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. As always, if you're able to leave a rating or review on your podcast platform, that really helps move this information to a more available space and ranks it higher so that people searching for help with these issues can find the information they need. I appreciate it very much. I hope you enjoyed that, and until next time. Thank you so much for being here today. If you love what you've learned, follow me on social media at Maggie Landes MD, and you'll never miss a thing. You can also check out my website at maggielandesmd.com and sign up to be part of our community of eaters. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll talk again soon.